Well, we are going to do a three-part series. Yesterday, I wanted to show from the Scripture that you actually can use engineering principles to analyze living things. In fact, it's not only that you can do it, but you should do it. You should do it. You should be using engineering principles to understand living things because they are clearly designed. Now, we did an exposition of Romans yesterday, and I'll give you 3 W's to just kind of keep it in mind. The first one is workmanship. Workmanship, we talked about that. Living things have key elements of handiwork or workmanship that are easily and readily and almost instantaneously identifiable, even if you can't put them into words. Here is how to remember workmanship. Multiple parts working together for a purpose. That's what you see with workmanship. This clicker, multiple parts working together for a purpose. The computer, everything, my hand, yes. All of these have multiple parts working together for a purpose. There's other things like precise timing, fit and finish, exact dimensions, order of putting them together. Remember, I mentioned all of those things, but if you can't remember all of that, it's just multiple parts working together for a purpose. Identifies workmanship. Second is wonder. Wonder. And that is that the quality of the workmanship is not shoddy, but it is of such a large extent that it doesn't just lead people to recognize that God exists, it is there to glorify God and expose His greatness and His attributes of infinity and omniscience and all of those other things. So there's wonder to it. It's wonder. And this pulpit here has multiple parts working together for a purpose, but it's pretty static. I like it. It looks good, but it's kind of static, and nobody would probably just be overwhelmed by the pulpit. But my hand, people should be overwhelmed by it. Not just because it's my hand, but because it's a hand on all that. So, workmanship, wonder, and then 3 is worldwide. Worldwide. Everybody on the planet sees it. Every culture has seen it. And you don't need a translator to say workmanship, wonder. It's everywhere, and everybody is accountable to ascribe credit to the Lord. And so that was the gist of yesterday's talk, so we can see all of those things. So we're going to do another talk today, and we're going to build on those engineering principles, and tomorrow we'll illustrate a bunch of those. So today, primary cause. Now, we all know that the Lord is the primary cause of things. So in this case, I'm not speaking of the Lord always as the primary cause. I want to know what is actually causing something to work. In other words, why do I respond the way I do when I interact with the environment? What is the cause of those things? And we also were talking about yesterday how organisms produce their own effects, or in other words, they self-adjust from the inside out, as opposed to the evolutionary worldview, which sees organisms shaped from the what? Outside in. Outside in. They are being molded by their environment as they go through space and time. And I'm saying no, organisms are active, problem-solving agents, or active problem-solving entities that solve the problems of the environment as they go through space and time. It kind of sounds subtle, and that's how evolutionists can slip in selection, but the causality is completely different. Causality is completely different, so it's very, very important. So what is the primary cause, in this particular case, of adaptability? And causation is really important. Stephen Meyer, who is an intelligent design theorist, he wrote this book, and he mentioned that since the beginning of the modern science, scientists have championed the common sense principle of scientific reasoning, known as vera causa, or true cause. Identifying that the early modern scientists affirmed this principle as the key aspect of the scientific approach in understanding nature. So a lot of times people would attribute magical thinking to why did something happen? Well, they would come up with a magical explanation. Well, science came in and said, no, we're not going to just apply magic. We're going to work things backwards until we get to the true or primary cause of that. And everybody uses this today. In fact, it's a powerful approach. If there's an aircraft accident, the investigators are going to go out and they're going to be looking for the underlying cause of this. Well, it crashed. It crashed due to pilot error. Well, they don't just stop and say pilot error. They want to go further. Well, why was there pilot error? Was the pilot confused? Was the pilot drunk? That happens more often these days. Was the pilot fatigued? Was there something wrong with the switching? Were the controls out there at the landing strip, were they confusing? Were they hard to see? You see what I'm saying? They're looking for the cause of the cause of the cause until they find out what the true cause is so that they can do what? Fix it. Fix it so it doesn't happen again. So that's what we're looking about with organisms. How do you get to actually, what do they do when they're adapting? Well, causation is very important. I'm linking it to yesterday's talk. You remember Stephen Hawking yesterday. He gave us the cause of why we're here. He said because there is a law such as gravity. Stop right there. Where did the law of gravity come from? I mean, I don't understand how this stuff gets published without someone saying, because there's a law of gravity. The universe can and will create itself from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists and why we exist. So he's going back to what he thinks the cause is, and his cause is basically what? Gravity on there. But Stephen Meyer, so we have two Stephens, Stephen Hawking versus Stephen Meyer, he says no, undirected materialistic causes, undirected, have not demonstrated the capacity to generate significant amounts of specified information. Now, when he's talking about specified information, it could be what's in the hymnal here, the information, or it could be the information in your DNA. That's what we're really wondering. Where did the information in the DNA and the information that actually lies above the DNA, where did all of that come from? And he's saying you don't get it from just natural causes, but it follows, and I did not read this quote yesterday, this was the follow-on, it follows that mind, conscious, rational, intelligent agency. Now, agency is very important because workmanship, when you see workmanship and you see handiwork, you are seeing the signs of agency. You're seeing the signs of rational, intelligent agency with consciousness. And if you were at First Baptist last night, I was emphasizing how evolutionists use natural selection, the natural selector, as the substitute for mind of conscious, rational agency. And they've slipped it in. But anyway, what philosophers call agent causation now stands as the only cause known to be capable of generating large amounts of specified information from a non-living state. So we have two different explanations. Gravity and unconscious, undirected forces versus a mind, an intelligent agency. Those are the two explanations that we have here. And going back to another intelligent designer, Richard Dembski said, in naturalism, that's the opposing view of what we would hold to, what then constrains the reproduction of living things? Well, it's clearly nature itself. Nature, as it were, has the ability to select those organisms that will be reproducing and eliminating those that will not. Thus, according to Darwin, nature itself constitutes the supreme animal breeder that shapes the path of life. I'm emphasizing this because we as creationists have been reading over these words and reading over things for a long time. Life, in their view, is being shaped by nature. And we haven't been catching it. It is being formed by nature, ergo nature can somehow create itself. So I'm setting up the debate here of the stage. So, causality is important. And we as Christians should really be concerned about true causes for, if nothing else, the sake of the Creator's glory. Because, I hope I'm right on this, if we don't credit the Creator, we are not going to honor the Creator. And therefore, we need to make sure He gets the credit for all of this. So the primary cause of adaptability is very, very important. So summary points, scientists are engaged in identifying true and primary cause of phenomena. That's one of their biggest functions. Why is it happening? How is it working? Second, identifying the primary cause of biological phenomena undergirds true explanations of their function. We need to figure out what is making them work without invoking magical explanations. 3, detecting specified complexity. Specified complexity means the words in the hymnal come in a specific order to convey a specific message. That's specified complexity. Well, the information in your DNA does the same thing. It comes in a specific order to convey specific messages. And as I mentioned yesterday as an engineer, when you specify something, you select for something or you select against. Someone selected for this kind of flooring and not carpet in this room. So they selected for this flooring and they selected against carpet. And that identifies agent causation. And then also volitional selection identifies specifying. So I'm really hammering home the act of thinking. What engineers do, they exercise volition. They make selections. That's the fundamental job of an engineer. Why is this important? Because evolution have a substitute designer. And all of those not First Baptist, sorry, Dr. Fred, Grace Baptist last night, Grace Baptist, the substitute designer is what? Natural selection. Nature selects. And I always ask the crowd, between natural and selection, which is the more important word? Everybody always says natural. Wrong. It's selection. Because you are projecting onto nature the ability to do all these things. Specify volitional choices. It is a subtle way to project onto nature godlike and human-like qualities. Selection. So it's very, very important. So here are the links. Nature creates itself. Paul says this. Nature is given credit for that. How does it work it out? Nature can select for this one, against this one, this one, this one. And those also from Grace Baptist last night. What in biology is natural selection responsible for explaining? Everything. 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 That means every feature on you, every molecule of every living thing, every behavior of every living thing, everything gets explained by it. And from last night, where is natural selection working? Everywhere. And it sees what? Everything. Do you see how it fills the bill of an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, God-like force? And who's been teaching natural selection for 40 years? We have, creationists. And we need to do a major about face. And this will tell you how to do the about face here. So specifying is very important. So if you look at this spaceship, it's going to go to the moon. It's going to go through all different kinds of environments, particularly the space capsule. Environments here, environments out in space, environments around the moon, environments coming back. Intrinsic design controls the detecting of all of those different challenging exposures. So as that capsule goes through all of those different environments, somebody designed it to detect the environment it is in and to do an adjustment on itself to do it. And it specifies self-adjusting solutions. So engineers in advance had to kind of anticipate, oh, it's going to be in this environment, it's going to be in this environment. And if we send a ship to Mars and back, there's all different kinds of environments. And even if it lands on Mars and then it has to get off Mars, somebody's going to anticipate all of these different environments, and they're going to equip the vessel to meet the challenges of all of those environments up front. Does you understand what I'm saying? And if you forget one of the environments and you don't equip it to meet the challenge, what's going to happen to the mission? It's It's going to fail because that thing is going to crump. Well, I'm saying if we have to do this with man-made things, maybe God did it with us. He equipped us and all the other creatures to engage all different anticipated environments through internal things. So I asked the question, could innate self-adjusting capacity be the true cause for organisms over the long term? Excuse me, what did I say?
You said true cause.
Yeah, the true cause. Yeah, it's probably there. It's not there. Well, I filled it in. I filled it in even though it wasn't there. And that's pretty amazing. On there. I did adjust to the environment. Don't call out any more mistakes. I'm going to tell you.
No, I wanted clarification.
Yeah, it is. It's the true cause. It is a true cause right there. All right. But this is the important question. What if the design of life is not due to organisms being driven through space and time very passively by diverse environments, which is what evolution teaches? What if they're not being driven through? What if they're driving themselves through? Subtle difference in words, but huge difference in causality. That's a very, very important thing. What if populations of organisms could be seen from a design-based perspective as driving themselves through diverse environments, just as human design vehicles do? And this is how science should work. We should be asking questions like this. Why can't we think of it like that? Why shouldn't we be thinking of organisms as these highly sophisticated, designed entities that can drive ourselves through space and time? I mean, which one really gives the Lord more glory? Some passive thing being molded by its environment, or some incredible thing that drives itself, taking on all different challenges and solving them? It's the latter. That really glorifies the Lord. And that's why He's letting us see all of these things. So we've built this half of the whiteboard. Now let's go over and ask this question. What is the value of engineering analysis? Well, we saw from yesterday's talk, it's quite valuable because engineering analysis is the way biology really works, except right now we basically reverse engineer things. We constantly take living things apart. Sometimes they have to die in the process because we're pulling them all apart, figuring out how things work, trying to get to the true cause. That's what biology really is. And there are some values. Some of this will be connecting to yesterday's talk. First, reverse engineering, as I said, basically takes things apart, but you don't always know how things work when you're taking it apart. You get to a point and you say, well, what's this for? And you don't know, and then you have to do some more research in taking it apart. Whereas forward engineering, which I would encourage more biologists to do, thinks through in advance how I'm going to get to a certain solution. So let's say I wanted to design a detector to detect light. Instead of reverse engineering an eyeball, I would say start out first by thinking through how would an engineer build a detector to detect lights? What kind of things would an engineer have to put in this? And what steps would they have to work? And how would they have to function if you think, and biologists for some reason resist doing this. If you think through in advance how an engineer would have to build it, then when I go to take the eyeball apart and reverse engineer it, I might already have a clue of what the things were supposed to do. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I've thought through what parts are needed to do such a thing. And why should an eyeball not function like a human-made detector? Why should it not? There's no biblical reason. And in fact, God says they're clearly seen. So since I can figure out how man-made things work, they're on the same planet, they're probably going to function the way God-made things are probably going to function the way man-made things work. All design analysis is a powerful way that neither omits nor concocts elements in the system. Now what I'm after here is this. As an engineer, and whether I'm forward engineering or reverse engineering, I never throw in a magical step. Engineers don't do that. So I take it apart, and I never get to the step where I say, and nature favored it here. Or nature selected it here. You realize what that is? That is a magical phrase. Nature cannot select anything. So when you say nature selected it, you're actually skipping over a lot of design. That's a magical phrase. That's a concocted phrase that's inserted there. And it's not explaining anything. Now, many biologists would say, yo, yes it is. You lived, you died. Sorry. There you are. Okay, perfect. You just picked right up where we were last night on that.
I will have a successful design.
Today.
Last night I didn't have any successful designs. I will have one before this conference is over.
That's right. I'll make sure we slip you in somewhere on that. And they say nature selected. But that's a magical step. What true engineers and true scientists want to know is, why did he live and why did he die? Or before the fall, why did you fill a new environment and why did you stay in your old environment? Why did that happen? Let's look inside the creatures and see if we can figure it out, rather than just magic, favored, not favored. So engineering is very, very important. But we don't want just plain old engineering analysis. We want biblically based engineering analysis. We want our engineering analysis to be framed by biblical truth. So Romans 1, as we found out yesterday, justifies applying engineering and design analysis to creatures, because workmanship is the key thing we're all looking for. So clearly seen, the fact that things are clearly seen, has some really important research implications. First, as I mentioned yesterday, design-centered thinking is essential to coming up with the correct explanations of how living things function. It's not an augment. You absolutely need to begin with that. Next, the exact principles. Oh, this is a hard one for many Christians and even creationists to get down. The exact principles for designing and building man-made things may be used to analyze living things. And that's how we know that they are designed. Cogitate on that for a second. What I'm saying is this. God says you can see your design because you readily recognize designed things. That's the thing that He has made manifest. Everybody readily recognizes designed things. What if biological things functioned in ways that were completely undecipherable by human beings? What if they had no correlation to this clicker, or no correlation to an engine, or no correlation to any man-made thing, but they functioned in ways that were totally foreign to us, completely undecipherable by us, and they just function that way? Dr. Nicholas comes up and he says it's designed. How can he ever prove that? I say, no, magic did it. And I'm just as right as you are. Because there's nothing, if that was true, that you could compare it to and say it really is designed, and my magic explanation is just as valid. Do you see what I'm saying? But they don't function like that. They function on the exact same principles that man-made things do. They function by gravity. They have biological processes. They have chemical processes. Their chemical processes are just like man-made chemical processes. They're just like it. So now when Dr. Nicholas comes up and he says, it's designed, and I say, no, it was magic, he says, but look, this is a man-made thing, this is a man-made feature, this is a man-made feature, and I find them exactly the same way in living things. Same things. So he is bolstered in saying, yes, it really was designed, and I'm kind of off base by saying it was magic. So they function that way. And as I mentioned, that is a good thing. That means that no matter how complicated the living things get, and they are very complicated, with enough hard work, people will be able to figure it out and figure it out and figure it out. And God isn't going to get His glory by stumping us. In other words, we get to a point where we can no longer figure it out. Because if that was true, it would no longer be clearly seen. But He gets His glory by the fact that it goes on and on and on and on for how long? Forever. That's how we know things are designed. Wow. So there's nothing mystical or magical about the function of living things. The function. There is something somewhat mystical about life itself because it's immaterial. But in terms of how your kidney works, how your heart works, how your brain works, all of those things, you don't need to come in with some magical explanations. They will function the same way man-made things will function. That's very, very important. And, we look at, some of you probably look at a computer and think there's some magic in it on that, but there really isn't. There really isn't. And some of us look at living things and think there's something magic in it, but there really isn't. It all functions in highly sophisticated yet understandable ways. And they will be understandable. So, clearly seen really has some important design and it really has some important research implications. So, Romans 1:20 is the key verse we all focus on, for the invisible things of God are clearly seen. And Genesis 1:20 gives a very important purpose for organisms. God told organisms to be fruitful, multiply, and what? Fill the earth. So he gave them a purpose for being able to adapt. He wants them to fill niches, niches, and niches. So how long does God want creatures to continually fill niches on the earth?
Forever.
Forever. As long as it's here. Maybe until the new heavens and new earth. But as long as it's here, those creatures continue to fill new niches. And the earth is constantly changing, and they're continuing to fill new niches. Why is that? What's the purpose of organisms expressing their design? To glorify the Lord. And now you have creatures filling all kinds of incredibly harsh niches, and we say, what? Wow, that's incredible. And that's glorifying the Lord. And this is a continuous process. So, the first thing we have to recognize is that the earth was always a dynamic and challenging place. Always. Right from the very beginning, it was a dynamic and challenging place. Eden was a specific place, but the earth was not Edenic-like all over. There's a change in thinking. People were not ever intended to run around naked forever. If Adam had not sinned and the fall had not occurred, would people have been metal workers on earth? Would we have started smelters on earth even if there had been no fall? Of course we would have. Dr. Vardaman, do you want to be a smelter worker naked? Of course not. So, we would have had to wear clothes. We wear clothes for all kinds of reasons other than the fact that we don't look good naked anymore on that. We wear them for all kinds of reasons, and there's no reason if Adam had not sinned that they wouldn't have made clothes for various reasons. And challenges are not sinful. Challenges are not sinful. Challenges are not sinful. Challenges are the way you get to see how good something is. Dr. Gunn gives a challenge to his students because that's the only way he knows how good they are or not. And this is the way we see how good God's design is because life was challenging. So if you go right to Genesis 1, we see that there was day and night on the earth. Is that dynamic or static? It's very dynamic. Over and over again. We said that the stars were for signs and seasons on that. Dynamic. Dynamic. There's no reason to believe that the entire earth was of one uniform climate all around. No reason to believe that. So there were seasons on the earth right from the very beginning. Sometimes the seasons are more challenging than others. And then God told organisms to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Now that's really important because once one creature comes in and it starts filling another creature's niche, what does it do to the creature that's already there? It changes it. It changes it for the creatures that are there. So if I come into your niche, I make it better for you. So I move into your niche. I make it better on that. Some people move into other people's niche, and they take things out and they leave things behind, which changes the niche for everybody else on that. So the mere fact that organisms come in and that the earth is a dynamic and challenging place. There. Please get that into your mind. Now, the challenges here are not lethal challenges. They're non-lethal challenges, but they're challenges just the same. They're challenges in order so that organisms can have an opportunity for living things to display their incredible self-adjusting capacity so they can solve all these challenges. And who would see it? Who would have seen all of this happening? Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve's descendants. So imagine, there's no fall. The earth is a dynamic and challenging place, and if there had been no fall to this day, we'd still be wondering, because we still see it. We'd still see creatures filling all different kinds of niches, and we are still amazed at what they're able to do. And it's a continuous, ongoing, tangible display of the great engineering prowess of the Lord. That's what it is. In fact, even after the fall, it's a continuous, ongoing display of that. The only trouble is, now some challenges can be what? Lethal. That is the only thing that's changed, is death. Death has come in. So before the fall, there were probably pine trees. There were probably oleanders. There were grasses. It was very similar in many ways to what we have today. You didn't have some of the flood geology, obviously, that was there, but in terms of the vegetation and plants and pine trees and birds and all the jays and finches and other things, they were there. They were there, just like today. And we tend to think that that was radically different. It was radically different before the fall because there wasn't death. But in many other ways, it was very similar. And all of this design glorifies an incredible designer. It does now. It would have before the fall. Now it's been marred by the fall. So here's that little light bulb means, voila, new idea, change thinking on all of this. The purpose of this is to glorify the Lord. And so the purpose of adaptation has always been to fill the earth. Because earth was dynamic, you have to put a dynamic thing on it. If I put a static thing in a dynamic environment, the static thing will probably be overwhelmed. So if you have a dynamic environment, you must put a dynamic thing in it, which is harder to build. Static things or dynamic things? Dynamic things, by far. This podium is static. I'm dynamic on that. Yeah, I thought you were asleep. Wow. Oh, he's got more hidden talents there. Oh, that's a good one. So, we need to do this. Dump death and survival as the created purpose for adaptation. Oh, I tell you, I'm looking at all of you in the room, that is a lot easier said than done. If I went out here at the break and I ask you why something happened, there's a 99.9% chance you're going to say, to survive. That's the answer you're going to give me, because you have been evolutionized, and your thinking has been evolutionized, and everything in life you're thinking of is to survive, survive, survive. And that's how we think. No, God gave us these adaptable abilities to fill different niches. To fill different niches. And even to this day, if you fill a niche and he doesn't, it doesn't mean that he has to die. It means you just stay where you are and you fill the new niche. It doesn't mean that one of you has to die. You notice he did not die on that. There's only one person in this room that dies. Anyway, so, and the key on 3, seeing God's glorious design and capabilities is a gift to all of us, because it's how we know how great God is from, you have the written word, but from his works. It's a big gift to us. So understanding the environment from a design perspective. There's a little light bulb there. First, time, space, matter, and energy, all of those things are created conditions. They're conditions. They're exposures. That's all they are. Time, is not alive. Rain is not alive. Wind is not alive. These conditions do not exercise agency. Oh, it's a toughie because everybody wants to see them as exercising agency. I said the word exercising agency. Can time, the earth, and matter be an agent of God? Yes. God can cause the earth to what? Open up and swallow a rebellious people. Can he not? Yes. He can cause it to be an agent, but he never created them to exercise agency. Exercise agency. Very important. The environment just is. It is a mindless, impartial, unconscious set of conditions to which organisms are exposed. And we're all exposed to different conditions. As I mentioned yesterday, this gentleman, he built a building and I built a building in San Francisco. They were exposed to the same earthquake. His building collapsed miserably, but mine stood strong on that. There, same conditions, same exposure. The reason why it stood is not due to the earthquake. The reason why mine stood is due to the designed ability and the designed traits that I put into it on that. Now, could God have used the earthquake as some kind of a punishment against San Francisco? Sure. How do you know he does? You don't. You don't. Unless God specifically tells us in his word that that thing happened to punish somebody, we don't know that. And a lot of times Christians want to assert this thing happened to San Francisco because blah, blah, blah. But the Lord said in John chapter 10, do you think that fell on them because they're worse sinners than you? I tell you, unless what? You all repent, you will all likewise perish. So we should resist ascribing punishment of God due to natural disasters on people. But the main factor is they're just impartial, unconscious conditions. They don't independently exercise agency. Wow. Takes us all the way back out. So what are self-adjusting organisms, or anything that's really self-adjusting for that matter? They're problem solving. We make self-adjusting cars and stuff to solve problems on there. And there are three key elements to all self-adjusting things. First, there's an input. Second, there's a control center. And third, there's an output. Input, control center, and output. If you want to adjust, you have to be able to know what's happening in your environment. Once you detect that what's happening in the environment, you have to have some logic that says, if this, then do that. If this, then do that. So if it's X, you do one thing. If it's Y, you do another. And you have to be able to respond to it. If any of those are missing, can something self-adjust? If you can't figure out what's happening, if you don't know what to do with it, and you can't respond, no. You need all three of these things in order to self-adjust. If any one of them is missing, it won't self-adjust. So if that's true of a man-made thing, why would it not be true of a God-made thing? This is where biblical insights can help us figure out organisms. Now, look at this. You see that arrow? I knew you were looking at that. It's pointing out. It's not pointing in. Because most of the time we put input like this because on man-made things, we dump the input into them. I load information into my computer. But with living things, it's the exact opposite. That's why I stuck the arrow out. Living things gather their data. They're actively surveilling their environment. They're picking it up for themselves. Do you see the difference? That's why living things are gathering their data here. So, you have a car, it's on cruise control. Guess what this car has? It's got some kind of speed sensor, a speed detector. Guess what else the car has? It has a little logic center, a computer, and then it has an output to adjust its throttle. Maybe living things do that too when they self-adjust. Now here's a picture to clarify things. This is a Boeing 747 flying over that mountain up in Washington, otherwise known as Mount what? Rainier. Let's assume that this jet right here is on autopilot. And let's assume that it has ground detecting radar. And I've got it on autopilot, and I've got it on ground detecting radar. And it's flying towards Mount Rainier, and as it gets closer and closer to it, what will the jet automatically do? It'll go up, fly over Mount Rainier, and then do what? Come back down to the preset altitude, because it will maintain a space over that. In biology, we see these kind of phenomena all the time. And they will say, the mountain triggered the jet to move. The mountain induced the jet to move. Or the mountain caused the jet to move. And you can kind of see that. But that's not true. Everything that controlling the jet is inside the jet. Inside it. And the jet specifies what it is going to do. So if you guys are in the jet, and it's on autopilot, and this gentleman sneaks into the cockpit, and he turns off the ground following radar. Clicks off the ground following radar. This jet, as it flies towards Mount Rainier, will do what? Smack. Right into it. Therefore, the mountain did not induce, the mountain did not trigger, the mountain did not cause anything to happen. All of the causation is 100% in there. Really important. This is how you relate to your environment. This is how man-made things relate. This is how God-made things will relate. There's nothing going to be magical in a God-made thing. It will relate in this way. It will happen in this way. What you have to do as a researcher is you have to look inside a God-made thing for the stuff that's equivalent to autopilot, stuff that's equivalent to ground radar, stuff that's equivalent to that. Do you see what I'm saying? Do your homework and look for it. Don't just say the mountain favored it, selected for it, induced it, caused it, or something else. Don't throw in some magical explanation. And this is where biology is stuck, and this is where even creationists have been stuck on that. We need to see how they actually work. So there's external conditions, there's either successful or failed solution on the outcome. There are specified features or traits in the creatures. They always define what the niche that you're going to live in. They always define what are favorable or unfavorable conditions, and they define what is a stimulus. Oh, this is so important because evolutionists get it backwards. They think the niche defines the creature. They think the environment defines what's favorable, and so on and so forth. Wrong-o. It's your traits which define it. So if this gentleman eats something and he has traits that he can digest it, it's nourishment. If he eats it and he doesn't have the traits, it's poison. And he dies. I know. That's it. It's the traits. It's the traits that determine it. And guess what? It's not everything outside of you is a stimulus to you. There's things inside of you which specify this will be a stimulus and this will not be a stimulus. How many of you are being bombarded by AM radio waves right now? All of you. How many of you are listening to AM radio in your head? You're not. Even though it's out there, you don't have a detector, you don't have a logic center, you don't have an output. Therefore, it is not a stimulus to you because it's your internal conditions which will define what is a stimulus. Wow. That's really important. So we ask, what if the engineering principles of self-adjusting human design things are the most accurate way to explain how creatures adapt. What if that's it? What if these beaks don't happen due to random mutations where one of them is selected? What if the birds can detect the conditions they're in, send a signal to the inside of mama before she even lays those eggs, which can adjust the beak to match the environment? Has anybody ever thought about that? No, what if that's really what's happening? What if the process isn't big beaks ones will live and the others will die? What if it isn't trial and error? What if it's a very targeted approach? What if it's very specific? Which one sounds more like what a loving, smart God would do? Trial and error or specific? Specific, of course. So that's probably it. So, what is the value of biblically based engineering analysis in identifying organisms as the primary cause of adaptability? Well, first of all, organisms, just like man-made things, they auto-sense their environment. Now that's very important. In fact, I should really camp on this. I should have put more on here. Where you relate to your environment, at your body-environment interface, the only thing that is keeping your body aware of what's happening outside of you are sensors and detectors of one type or another. No sensors, no detectors, your body is completely blind. Do you know what I mean? So, as you relate to your environment, it's sensors and detectors which are at the front line of you gathering information. So they really need, they really are like the Rodney Dangerfield of biological things. They don't get no respect, but they should get a lot of respect. They should get a lot of respect because it's your sensors and detectors which keep you going. You know, I went to Boston a couple months ago, and there's Old Ironsides, oldest ship in the U.S. Navy. And right next to it is a destroyer from World War II. Ironsides was actually just about as long as the destroyer, and it was actually a little wider than the destroyer. And at full sail, Old Ironsides could almost keep up with the destroyer. It was a pretty impressive thing. The main difference between Old Ironsides and the destroyer, the main thing was that destroyer is bristling with sensors, detectors, sonars, radars, all kinds of stuff to do what? Gather data and information that Old Ironsides didn't have. In fact, Old Ironsides was big enough you could have put one of those big guns of the destroyer and it wouldn't have sunk it. It could have run it. It's the sensors which are really, really important. Next, organisms auto-adjust. They auto-adjust to their environment through all different kinds of ways, which ranges from very fast physiological changes to multi-generational changes. Here's one, these mice. I mentioned this last year, a couple years ago. These male mice are exposed to cherry blossom odors while they're sitting on a metal pad, and the minute they get the exposure to the odor, their foot gets shocked. So expose, shock, expose, shock, expose, shock. They're mated with naive female mice that have never been exposed to the odor before. And then they have puppies. And then we sacrifice the puppies and look to see what the changes are. And in this particular case, this is a stain through the olfactory region of the mice. It's like looking through their nose, and their nerves are stained blue. The regular tissue is this color. And here's the sensory bulbs that to pick up odors. Look over here, all the way to the right. These are the mice whose dads were exposed to cherry blossom odor. And this are the nerve endings for cherry blossom odor. And these mice have never been exposed to it. And their mom was a naive female. They were able to detect that information, pass it on epigenetically, no genetic change, to their offspring, and their offspring are primed to smell cherry blossom odor. No trial and error, no selection, no death. It's a mechanism to make them fill the earth. Foot shocks plus cherry blossom odor. Biologists get off on shocking feet on that a lot. Look at this frog. He lays his eggs in a pond and they start to grow into little tadpoles. But a dragonfly lays its eggs and it grows into the nymphs. The nymphs eat the tadpoles. What happens if you take the tadpoles are in a tank, and you take these little nymphs right there, you put them in a sack, a screen, so they can never touch the tadpoles, but you just put them in the tank with the growing tadpoles. They're just in the tank. Well, if there are none of those nymphs, they grow a tail that's about this big and this strong, but if the nymphs are present, they grow a larger, more powerful tail, enabling them to outswim the nymphs. They are able to detect something in the water coming off the nymphs. And they do what? They self-adjust. Self-adjust to that. Wow, there's no genetic change. Blind cave fish. We've been telling this story for a long time. A fish ends up in a cave, and the eyes turn out to be a bad deal because they bump and they get scratched and they get diseased and all this other stuff. So over long periods of time, eventually eyes are a detriment and it goes blind, and eventually they go blind and they lose their pigmentation. Really? I mean, we've been saying this story in creationist literature for a long time. There was a genius who published an article in Acts and Facts about 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, that said, what if the evolutionary and the creationist stories are both wrong? What if fish were designed to detect the cave environment and lose their pigmentation and eyesight rapidly because they were designed to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth? Well, guess what? A year later, a paper came out, published in Science, that was in 2013 right there. This long explanation is how it happened. But the bottom line is, these fish can detect the cave environment, and in one generation, not gobs, one generation, they lose their pigmentation and they lose their eyes. Because they're able to detect the environment. There's none of that silly story about eyes becoming a bad thing and over a long period of time being selected away. We were totally wrong on that explanation. Well, there's all kinds of ways in which organisms use input, control centers, and output to adjust how they actually function. That's really kind of cool. Epigenetic changes are changes in the expression of the DNA, but not changes in the DNA themselves. And this controls a lot. We'll look at those tomorrow. Sometimes organisms have mutations, and the word mutation probably needs a better definition because it just simply means a change in DNA, but they're not random at all. Sometimes the DNA changes itself on purpose. On purpose. In order to make these changes. Sometimes, as you remember, during meiosis, you get the chromosomes and they line up, and you remember sometimes part of what dad's chromosome crosses over and gets on mom's chromosome and vice versa. A lot of times that's not random either. They specifically direct crossing over of genes from one chromosome to another. It's not random at all in order for creatures to fill the earth. Sometimes there are parts of the DNA which are variation-inducing genetic elements which control changes in the DNA in order to increase your variety so that you fit various niches so that you can fill those niches. And sometimes there are real-time genetic adjustments which are happening not as a read-only memory on your computer, but as RAM memory. In fact, this evolutionist put a book out, Evolution for the 20th Century, and he says, this book is dedicated to considering the many ways that living organisms actively change themselves, uncovering molecular mechanisms by which living organisms modify their genomes is a major accomplishment of the 20th century biology. That's incredible. So we're always used to be thinking, your DNA is like static and it just gets hit by these cosmic rays or something and causes mutations that then evolution selects for. Not probably wrong at all. This is phenomenal. Your body actually is able to detect things in the environment, sends it to logic centers, and gets right down to the genetic level and precisely changes things in order to respond, to give you the output that you need. This whole trial and error stuff was probably a felonious story all along. I hope I said that right. Fallacious story. fallacious, felonious, whatever. Anyway, organisms have a nature that must be designed up front to be nurtured. Oh, I just kind of glanced over that. You know what that saying is? You're not static like a rock. You're welcome. He's able to learn from his experiences in life. So, he does have nature and nurture. You're the man you are today, partly because of your genetics and partly because of the experiences you've had in life. But he had to be designed up front to be able to learn from his experiences. Learn from them. So someone had to put in you a nature which was capable of being nurtured. And if you don't put the capability to be nurtured in up front, he will never be nurtured, and you would be as static as a rock. So everything goes back to what's been designed up front. Wow, that's really important. And therefore organisms are able to auto-colonize the planet. Auto-colonize. They auto-adjust, they auto-detect, they auto-adjust, they auto-colonize. Wrap up. Why do they do that? The Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 1, verse 20. So organisms can be what? Fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And fill the earth. That's why they're able to do it. Is it being imposed? Is this capability being imposed on them from the outside? Are they passive entities being driven through space and time? Or are they active, problem-solving entities which drive themselves through space and time? The latter. That was an easy one. On that, that was like a gimme. On that, they are active problem-solving entities which drive themselves through space and time as an expression of their internal capabilities. Finally, all of this expression of internal capabilities is ultimately to do what? Bring glory to the Lord as the great designing engineer that He is. And that's, to me, this is far more glorious than a death and survival driven explanation for things. Amen? Thank you. Thank you so much. Turn over to Dr. Nicholas. I will.